Now, there's cup replays and there's very big cup replays. And this one for Chelsea at Aston Villa tonight is a biggie. Maurico Pochettino, although he's had backing from the board, says he's had supportive texts, he's clearly under pressure to come up with results because you can't keep delivering the sort of performances Chelsea are without some repercussions. He says he trusts his players, Tom, in the papers today. Frankly, I wouldn't want to put my trust in that lot right now if I was the manager.
Understandably so, after two back-to-back defeats where they've conceded 4 goals in both games. And it's interesting. I was speaking to a former Premier League player yesterday who was sort of in his 30s, and he was talking about the younger generation of players and how they just maybe don't quite have the same motivation as they once did. And when you look at Chelsea in particular, with the long-term contracts they've been put on, just the sheer amount of them that they've been brought through the door and the money they're on, you just got, and based on the results we've seen, you do wonder about their motivation. So I do fear for Poch if he's putting his trust in his players. But what else can he say?
But if you're Pochettino, you've I mean, goodness me, he's an Argentina centre half. There's a lot of pride about him. He's played for a big country. He's played for some big football teams, and he's managed some big football teams. He can't be putting up with that. Players who don't have the motivation that they once had. Is it not up to him to say, get some motivation?
Yeah, 100%. It is on him to try and draw that out of players, and it was ever thus when it comes to being a manager. But I'm just saying, it seems like it's getting harder and harder, and then we're in a situation where Chelsea feel like at the moment they're going backwards.
But I think there are questions about him, about handling players in certain ways. I remember watching Man City versus PSG when he was PSG boss, and him stood on the touchline trying to get Mbappe, Neymar, Messi to track back.
Yeah, but that's like an impossible job.
Well, yeah, but they just weren't taking any notice. Yeah, I know, I realise they are players at the top end of the stratosphere, but he couldn't get them to do it. And maybe with this lot, he can't get them to do it either. Maybe he has lost the ability, or maybe he never had the ability, to motivate players who are on lots of money, who really need a different type of manager to get them playing.
Well, that is a good point. I think there's 2 questions here. It's one, whether it's almost an unmanageable job, who can do this.
What, at Chelsea?
At Chelsea. But if you don't agree with that, if you don't think that way, then is Poch up to the task? And I do think he's not without any blame. You can't absolve him of any blame. But when you look at the way it's gone in the Todd Bowley regime, with the way they've gone about building it, I just think it's a very difficult job to get right. I just look at the amount of players they've brought through the door who frankly, I think a lot of them aren't quite good enough. You can't rely on young players in the way that they've done that, and on such extremely long contracts, putting them all in at once, this sort of trolley dash approach they've taken, and expect it to work. And we've seen from the likes of Graham Potter, Frank Lampard, and now Maurico Pochettino, what a difficult job that is. And if you look at the way they're playing, it feels like they're getting worse. Their best results they had this season were in the first 3 months when they had sort of the new manager bounce, but of late.
Do you think the manager has any sort of say in the type of players that come in for Chelsea, or do you think they're actually told this is the player you're getting?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying the whole approach, I would have thought, if you were looking at it objectively, you think you could do with some senior pros in there. They still haven't really brought them in.
Well, they've got Thiago Silva in there, whose wife's made it pretty clear what she thinks should happen to Pochettino, said it's time for change. Poch says he's had a conversation with Thiago Silva about that. Didn't reveal what the upshot was of it. But that's if you're a manager, you're thinking, goodness me, what is going on? We can't have this.
No, that isn't helpful at all, is it?
So going into a game like Aston Villa, you never always know what you're going to get with Villa, because they, as Ollie Watkins alluded to the other day, every time they have a bad result, they then have a good result, but you never feel they're far away from a bad one again.
I don't know about that. I feel like it's just reached that stage of the season where the games are starting to rack up, and teams are every so often throwing in a not so great performance. But I think overall they've been pretty consistent, particularly at home, and I definitely make them favourites for this match. It's interesting with Poch, back in 2014, reading our Chelsea man Andy Dillon's piece, back in 2014 when he was Spurs manager, he was at Villa, 1-0 down, on a run when he'd taken like 9 points from 11 games, and apparently he turned to the dugout and mouthed that we better pack our bags for Barcelona. And then in the last 6 minutes they scored twice. But who got the winner in that game? Harry Kane. They don't have a striker anywhere near as good as that to dig them out of the mire now.
But that's a big problem for quite quite a few teams, the out-and-out striker, and they actually offloaded
They haven't
one.
spent £1 billion, have they? This is what Alan Shearer keeps going on about. He says £1 billion that Chelsea have spent, and they
So
still
why
don't
you
have a
get yourself
striker.
So why don't you get
I mean,
yourself a
Victor
striker?
Osimhen's there to be taken on the money they've had.
Yeah, but they haven't got that leeway now, have they?
Well,
under-
exactly, and
under
that comes
FFP
back
rules?
to the way it's been run. And I don't think that's why, whilst when you look at Mauricio Pochettino, there are, as I said, there are legitimate criticisms, and I do wonder if, even in this short space of time since he was at Tottenham, the game has sort of moved on tactically. I cover Tottenham. Ange Postecoglou, his approach is so detailed. Roberto De Zerbi at Brighton, so detailed that even someone like Poch, who seemed like the visionary kind of manager only a few years ago, it feels like it's moved on from there. Forget about the likes of Antonio Conte and Jose Mourinho. Definitely feels like it's gone past them. So I'm not saying he doesn't have any kind of sort of role in this, but I just think the way Chelsea have set themselves up, I don't know who's going to dig them out. I mean, hopefully, you look at Poch and you think of his history at Tottenham, it was based on moulding young players. What have Chelsea got? A lot of young players, but even he's struggling at the moment with that.
Of course, a lot depends, I suppose, on the type of teams that they put out tonight, Villa versus Chelsea. I sort of get the feeling that Chelsea can't afford to put out a weakened team. I'm not sure what a weakened team is for Chelsea. I'm not sure what a strong team is for Chelsea. But it feels like a game you really can't lose, shouldn't lose, can't afford to lose.
Well, again, back to Andy's piece, he was saying this really should have been a bit of a sideshow into the season.
Yeah.
It's suddenly taken this unnecessary, extra level of gravity because of the way it's gone recently in these last two performances, where they've, particularly against Wolves, and that sort of summed it up. The first they actually took the lead. They did take the lead. Where lovely ball from Moises Caicedo, a player that I watched a lot at Brighton, was a wonderful player, who obviously has been struggling, and it sets up Cole Palmer, who's been the sort of shining light during the season. And then minutes later, loses the ball, and all right, it was a lucky goal that Wolves scored with the deflection, but that sort of sums it up. There's like one step forward, two steps back with Chelsea right now, and because of those results and the heat that's coming on Poch at the moment, suddenly this game has real significance.
So if you're a Chelsea fan going to Villa, what are you expecting? Are you expecting to come back down the motorway feeling pretty depressed?
I don't think you're going to be overly optimistic, but then again, look at Newcastle last week, who are going through their rocky period themselves. They went in and put an absolute sort of masterclass display of how to play Villa away at the moment. And as you pointed out, Villa are not infallible anymore. That amazing record at home was ended by Newcastle, and there's always a chance. And look, Caicedo, Cole Palmer, as I mentioned, they've got some really, really good players. They've got some players who they really overpaid for, who I'm not sure. Well, I'm thinking more like Mudryk. I'm not sure he'll ever sort of really sort of justify that kind of fee. It's just mad when you think like 90 million. That is even in today's market. You've got to be buying a sure thing, not prospect. But that's a sort of another conversation. But there's still a lot of talent in that squad, and maybe backs to the wall. He's put his faith in his players. Again, I'm not sure he could have done anything else on that front, but maybe this could be the turning point, like it was back in 2014 when he was Tottenham manager.
So if you're coming off the fence, you say maybe, are you expecting Chelsea victory tonight?
No, I'm not.
No. Villa win?
Yeah.
Yeah, Villa win for me too.